Okay, I have an Illustrator window on the left and a Photoshop window on the right, and I'm going to demonstrate using Vector Smart Objects to work between Photoshop and Illustrator. And you'll find a condensed list of basic principles for working with Vector Smart Objects in the PDF documentation for this week. So to begin, I have a few files open here in Illustrator, and here's the dot pattern, one that we've been working with in class, and I'm going to copy this Command or Control C to my clipboard, and then over in Photoshop I'll start a new document, and it just assumes the size of the 12 by 12 inch polka dot square that's on my clipboard. And so I can just Command Control V to paste this square into my new Photoshop document, and it asks me how I want to paste it, and I'll choose Smart Object. And now hit Enter to confirm that. And now in the Layers panel, I can see this new layer here that contains my Vector Smart Object, and this little icon on the thumbnail helps identify this as a Vector Smart Object. So first I'm going to go ahead and give this Photoshop file a name and save it. Okay, and now what happens when you add a Vector Smart Object to a Photoshop file, this generates an embedded Adobe Illustrator file that's now part of this Photoshop document. I can only access this embedded Illustrator file through this document, and to do that I just double click on the thumbnail here, and so now I'm transported over to Illustrator. The embedded file is named Vector Smart Object, and it has a number after it, and Photoshop will just generate these names and number these in sequence as you create new Vector Smart Objects in your file. But notice this file also has the global swatches and the pattern swatches used in this particular object. So now I can edit this in Illustrator, and the first thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to close the original file, the file with the polka dots, just to avoid confusion. I like to do this. Okay, so back to my Vector Smart Object, and I'm going to do a little editing here. I'll go ahead and scale this pattern a bit, and I need to uncheck Object, and I'll do this at 50%. Okay, now very important, I need to save Command Control S in order to see this update over in Photoshop. So back in Photoshop, we can watch this spin and update, and there it is. Next, I want to add another bit of art that we worked on this week when we were working with Live Trace in Illustrator, this blue flower motif. And this time I can just drag this art from Illustrator right into the Photoshop document, and this automatically creates a new Vector Smart Object. So hit Enter. And now I can make some simple transformations to this, and anything I do like scaling, rotating, things like that, they don't affect or change the embedded Illustrator file. And even things like changing the opacity setting, that doesn't affect the vector art in Illustrator either. And so to go back to working on the flower in Illustrator, I'll double click the thumbnail in the Layers panel, and now I'm transported back to Illustrator, and I've got a new Vector Smart Object Illustrator file. So first I'm going to close my original blue flower file, and now I can make some changes here, and I think I'm going to add a few background shapes just here and there where I saw a little show through in the Photoshop document, and I want to correct that. And so you can make all kinds of typical Illustrator edits here, and then of course you need to save your work, and then you can jump over to Photoshop and watch it update. And now I can see I need to do a little to this pattern, so I'll double click on the thumbnail for the pattern layer, and so it's just back and forth like this. I could change this to a new pattern entirely, so this could be a fun way of just flipping through one of your pattern libraries and seeing what works best. I'm just changing the opacity here and creating a new swatch just to make this pattern a bit more subtle. And I also like to delete any extra art so that doesn't show up in my Photoshop file. And then when I'm finished, I just save it, and then I can jump back over to Photoshop. And now I can drag the flower layer down to create a new copy of this Vector Smart Object. So now any changes that I make to the flower in Illustrator will update both of these flower elements. And now I want to go back to Illustrator, and I have another file open here. This one has a line art border that I scanned from a royalty-free clip art book, and I've live traced it. And I created an opacity mask using one of the texture files we worked with this week. This one's the twine texture. And so this adds some nice roughness to this border art, and of course it's so editable. So I'm just going to go ahead and see how it looks by just dragging this into the Photoshop document now. And I'm creating yet another Vector Smart Object. So hit enter. And so it's such a great advantage to be able to work with these and scale things without having to worry about the resolution. So this is really the reason that working between Illustrator and Photoshop like this can be so versatile. It's like you never have to finally commit to anything. If you have a lot of your designs and elements in vector form, there's just no limit to how much you can reconfigure and remake things. And it's all possible with Vector Smart Objects in Illustrator. So to wrap up, here are some ground rules for Vector Smart Objects. Once you've pasted or dragged your vector art into Photoshop to create the Vector Smart Object, close the original Illustrator file. That art is no longer connected to the Photoshop document, and this will help you avoid confusion. And then whenever you make an edit to the Smart Object, to that Vector Smart Object file in Illustrator, save your changes in the temporary .ai file to commit them to Photoshop. And you'll find more information in the PDF lesson guide this week. And here are some more facts about Vector Smart Objects. Vector Smart Objects are self-contained Illustrator files embedded in the Photoshop document. They aren't saved as separate Illustrator files that you can find on your hard drive. They actually live inside the Photoshop document. When you drag or paste Illustrator objects into Photoshop, the Vector Smart Object created retains the structure of the original Illustrator file. So that Vector Smart Object.ai file retains the layers, masks, hidden objects, all of those things from the original. And when you work on the Vector Smart Object in Photoshop, you can apply filters, you can apply effects and masking in Photoshop, but this doesn't alter the embedded vector art. But you can't alter pixels by painting on or erasing Vector Smart Objects in Photoshop until you rasterize them. And to rasterize a Vector Smart Object, the command is in the Layer menu, and then choose Smart Objects, Rasterize. But beware, it's a one-way trip. Once you rasterize, the vector information is gone from the Photoshop file. So that's Vector Smart Objects in Illustrator. And that's all for Illustrator 2. I hope you've enjoyed the class. We've had a lot of fun and covered a lot of ground. And I hope this inspires you to keep creating in Illustrator.